So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the Detroit Lions are a very good football team. They're very complete after their 2023 offseason, but they could get better. There are a lot of different players on the trade block and in free agency that could help improve this Lions roster even further and push them even farther ahead of the competition in 2023, especially at the wide receiver position, as Jameson Williams was officially suspended for the first 6 games of 2023. So, with that being said, today I wanted to take a look at potential trade targets for the Detroit Lions, players that would boost up this roster, improve the overall team depth and talent, and put this team in a better position to win this season. So, with all that being said, without any further ado, let's get right on into taking a look at the Detroit Lions' biggest trade candidates in the 2023 preseason. Now, starting off, there are 5 names that have really stood out to me over the last couple of weeks that have been rumored or have been, kind of thought of as potential guys that they could be moved from their current roster. And these guys have either been rumored to Detroit or have been rumored just in general to have been traded recently. Now, DeAndre Hopkins is the first one. This is the only one where I think it doesn't make a lot of sense. Yes, the Detroit Lions have the capital to do it. Yes, the Detroit Lions have the assets and the cap space to go get DeAndre Hopkins. However, I really don't see the reason, right? I get that DeAndre Hopkins is very good. I get that he is a very talented wide receiver, but for a wide receiver that is falling out of his physical prime, a wide receiver that is still very productive, but really isn't the separator that the Lions like to have on their roster right now, I just don't think it makes a ton of sense for the Lions to go out and get DeAndre Hopkins, despite the seemingly obvious need of, hey, the Lions don't have an X wide receiver. DeAndre Hopkins is a pretty good X wide receiver and will not cost very many draft assets, but I honestly just do not see the trade going through. Plus, he already came out and said he's going to play for the Cardinals in 2023. So I didn't really include him on that list, but the rumor has been floating around. So I did want to mention it. But the 4 guys that I think are really on the trade block for the Lions and the Lions could be interested in include Ed Oliver, the defensive tackle from Buffalo, Van Jefferson, the wide receiver from the Los Angeles Rams, Corey Davis, the wide receiver from the New York Jets, as well as KJ Hamler, the wide receiver from the Denver Broncos. Now, I want to start off with Ed Oliver because Ed Oliver has been a very polarizing player over the last couple of years. He played 13 games for the Buffalo Bills a season ago, and in his career so far has had 14 and a half sacks, 30 tackles for loss, and 42 quarterback hits. Last season, Ed Oliver was top 10 in average depth of tackle, top 10 in pass rush win rate, top 10 of run stop win rate, as well as top 10 in run tackles for loss, as well as top 10 in pressure rate from the defensive tackle position. Statistically, he is not the most out there player. Statistically, he does not put up the numbers like Aaron Donald or Chris Jones or some of the other elite defensive linemen like Quinnen Williams or Dexter Lawrence from the New York Giants, but he is a really disruptive player in the middle that I think would really help complete the Detroit Lions defensive line. He is good against the run. He's phenomenal against the pass. And yeah, there are games where he might disappear. There are games where he might not be the dominant threat, might not be the dominant force that you traded for. But there's going to be 3 or 4 games a season where this guy is going to just completely take over. There's going to be games like Thanksgiving. The Lions saw it on prime time last year that this player just took over the game, dominated the interior of the Lions' very strong interior offensive line, and just was arguably the best defensive player on a very good Buffalo Bills defense. And then, of course, you're going to have some good games, some bad games, and you're going to have some games, probably 2 or 3, where Ed Oliver just isn't the same player. But you're also going to get 3 to 4 games where he's an elite playmaker, and the rest of the time he's going to be an above average defensive tackle, arguably a top 10 defensive tackle in the NFL. Now, I think in order to pull this off, it would be a major move. I think the Lions would probably have to give up at least a second round pick in order to go get Ed Oliver. right? A former top 10 pick, not quite living up to the draft hype, but not quite being a bad player either for the team that he's currently on. I don't think the Bills are going to be out there shopping or actively searching to trade Ed Oliver, but I think for the right package, right, you unload a player that isn't the best for your football team, a player that's been good but not great as a top 10 pick. Plus, you don't have to pay the massive contract that Ed Oliver is going to demand later, probably down the line in a year or two. So you get that off the books. You get an extra second round pick or a third round pick even, and you kind of move forward, potentially looking to replace that in the draft next year. Now, I think that this is a fairly realistic one to happen. I could see why both sides might want to make it, but I could also see why the Bills might not want to give up Ed Oliver, as they definitely feel like they are in a Super Bowl window and want to compete for that as soon as possible. So, moving on to the receiving position, I think Van Jefferson is a very good player for the Detroit Lions. Now, Van Jefferson is not necessarily the best option, I think, for Detroit, but I think he would be a good one. I think he'd be relatively cheap, would not have a massive contract. It would only probably take a sixth, maybe even a seventh round selection to bring him into the Detroit Lions. Last year, played 9 games for the Rams, had 44 targets, 24 receptions, 369 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the season. And, with a rotating room at quarterback, with Matthew Stafford being out and Stafford being back in, and then the backups playing, and then the backups not playing very well and being a pretty run-heavy team at points during the season, the Rams offense didn't really allow Van Jefferson to be a big playmaker, but he averages a lot of yards per reception. He's a very big play threat over the top. And even though he's not a Jameson Williams, a Tyreek Hill, a Jalen Waddle speed, he is a relatively fast, big play dynamic wide receiver that I think could come in and replace exactly what DJ Chark did a season ago in the exact same role and play it just as well as Chark did, if not even better. Again, Van Jefferson would be extremely cheap, would cost maybe a 6th round pick at the most to bring in, and would certainly and immediately upgrade the wide receiving core before week 1 ever comes around. Now, another wide receiver I wanted to talk about is KJ Hamler. This is a player that doesn't get a lot of hype. This is a player that is very rarely talked about anymore, and a player that really, after being a relatively high pick a few seasons ago, has really fallen out of favor with the Denver Broncos. Now, I'm just going to read off the wide receiving core for the Denver Broncos right now, and just kind of to put into perspective why KJ Hamler doesn't really fit, right? Wide receiver 1 is Courtland Sutton. Wide receiver 2 is Jerry Jeudy. Wide receiver 3 is Tim Patrick, who's coming back from an Achilles injury. Wide receiver 4 is Marvin Mims, a guy that they just drafted relatively high in the draft. And then wide receiver 5 is KJ Hamler, a player with legit 4.3 speed and a player that has averaged 23.6 yards per reception a season ago. Now, on top of that, the Broncos also have Greg Dulcich as well as Albert Okwuegbunam, the tight end, I believe going into his 2nd or 3rd season. So KJ Hamler really doesn't fit, right? KJ Hamler doesn't have a spot. He's not going to command targets, and he's probably not going to be anything more than the wide receiver 4 at best in terms of target share in just the wide receiving room alone. On top of that, of course, you have Javonte Williams and a strong rushing attack, and KJ Hamler is no longer a great fit for the Denver Broncos. But you know where he would be a good fit? A team like the Detroit Lions that values speed, that values separation, and values big playability. What is that? What does KJ Hamler have? All of those things. Last year played in 7 games and only got 14 targets. Again, the offense was kind of in disarray, wasn't a whole lot of room for him. So I think there's a good opportunity that even for something like a 6th round, 7th round selection, you're getting a player that could average 23.6 yards per reception and put up some really big plays for you, kind of like Marvin Hall used to do for the Detroit Lions, kind of like what DJ Chark did last year for the Detroit Lions. And even if you trade a 7th round pick and he only ends up getting 20, 30 targets and gets 200 yards and averages, 16, 17 yards a gain, that is worth a 7th round selection until Jameson Williams returns to play and can bring that big play threat on a more consistent basis. However, I think there's one perfect option for the Detroit Lions. I think there's a player that is kind of in a similar situation to KJ Hamler that doesn't quite fit in the offense that he signed with anymore. He's a big play threat, but unlike KJ Hamler, who's a little bit undersized, could potentially be an X wide receiver for the next couple of years and be super productive at it. That player is going to be Corey Davis, the wide receiver formerly of the Western Michigan Broncos, currently of the New York Jets. He signed a big contract with the Jets a few seasons ago, and it never really worked out. Last year, with a rotating quarterback carousel thing going on in New York, he played in 13 games, had 32 receptions for 536 yards, 2 touchdowns, while averaging 16.8 yards per reception. Now, he has never broken 1,000 yards in his career, but he does average 14.2 yards per reception as a 6'3", 210-pound wide receiver, a player that could legitimately play the X role. And you might say, okay, this is a first-round bust. This is a player that I think quietly has been one of the larger busts of the last decade or so, taken in the top 5 by the Tennessee Titans and never having a 1,000-yard season. But I don't think his situation has ever really been ideal for him to succeed either. Right? In Tennessee, you started off with Marcus Mariota and that whole offense that never really clicked with Corey Davis on the field, on top of being a run-heavy offense with King Henry at the helm. So, you go through 4 years of Tannehill and Mariota. You go through 4 years of being just primarily a blocking wide receiver for Derrick Henry, and you go to the Jets, right? A quarterback-needy team, a team that just drafted a young quarterback that's known for big plays, and it turns out Zach Wilson wasn't very good. So he spent the last 2 seasons catching passes from Joe Flacco and Zach Wilson and the backup quarterbacks for the New York Jets, and he's never really succeeded there either. Now you could say, okay, well, the New York Jets just got Aaron Rodgers. That's going to help him succeed a lot. But Breece Hall, Michael Carter, and Israel Abanikanda are going to be a really good running back trio for them next year. And then you look at their wide receiving core and their receivers in general. You have Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard, Mecole Hardman, Randall Cobb, and Denzel Mims. Then you go to the tight ends, Tyler Conklin and CJ Uzama, as well as Jeremy Rucker, who's been a 4th-round pick on 2 seasons ago now, are all really, really good pass catchers. So just like KJ Hamler, Corey Davis no longer has a big priority role in the new offense, and especially with Aaron Rodgers prioritizing his guys, I can guarantee you Garrett Wilson's going to start. I can guarantee you Alan Lazard's going to start, and I promise you that Randall Cobb is going to get quite a significant amount of time in the slot. Corey Davis does not have a role or a path to playing, regardless of how good he does, because Aaron Rodgers pretty much has the Jets right where he wants them, and they don't have any power anymore, right? Even if Corey Davis is better than Alan Lazard, which I think he is, he's not going to play because Aaron Rodgers is essentially in charge of that regime right now and essentially is going to do what he wants and play with the players that he wants, and he's not going to pick Corey Davis. So I think he'd be a really good trade candidate. Again, an incredibly cheap candidate, somebody that will not cost more than a 5th-round selection in next year's class. A player that, can come in, is only 28 years old, and can play the X wide receiver position at pretty much as well as what DJ Chark did a season ago, right? 13 games is more than DJ Chark played. 536 yards is right around the same thing. 2 touchdowns, 1 touchdown less than DJ Chark, and I believe actually averaged more yards per reception last year than what Chark did for the Detroit Lions. I think if the Lions are going to make a trade, it will be for Corey Davis. It will be a big body, fast wide receiver that can create separation downfield, is a big play threat, has strong hands, and I think Corey Davis fits the Brad Holmes wide receiver build impeccably. So with all that being said, those are the top trade candidates for the Detroit Lions. Those are the players I think could be on the Detroit Lions radar, and the players that we could see joining the Detroit Lions before the start of OTAs in training camp next week. I think if there's going to be a trade, it's going to happen sooner rather than later. Give Jared Goff time to build chemistry with his wide receivers and give the offense time to gel together. But with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below what players you think the Lions could potentially trade for. What players do you think are potentially on the Detroit Lions trade roster or kind of on their trade radar right now? I'm very curious what you guys have to say and what you guys think about potentially trading for a wide receiver or a defensive playmaker. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have not subscribed yet, please go down below and do that. Helps the channel out a ton, and you can hit the bell notification so you never miss a Detroit Lions upload. But thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions!